I can't believe you still think you're in charge, Tasha Williams said, her voice calm but full of authority. David Hayes, the cold and arrogant CEO of Hayes Enterprises, looked at her in disbelief, as if he couldn't process what was happening. You're fired, he snapped, his voice laced with annoyance, barely looking up from the papers on his desk. His gaze was cold, unfeeling, as he dismissed her like an insignificant servant. Tasha stood there, unmoving, her eyes unwavering as she stared at him. The harsh words barely fazed her. This wasn't the first time he tried to break her spirit, but this time was different. She wasn't about to let him win. She'd been playing a different game all along, and now it was time to show her cards. Without saying a word, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. With deliberate slowness, she placed it on his desk. David didn't notice at first, still too focused on his dismissal. "What's this?" he muttered, glancing at the envelope. "Just a piece of paper?" Tasha didn't respond right away. She just stood there, waiting. Finally, after a long pause, David picked up the envelope and ripped it open carelessly. His eyes scanned the contents for a moment. Then, his face went pale. His fingers trembled slightly as he read the first line. It was an official document, a degree in business from a prestigious university, something that clearly meant more than just a piece of paper. He blinked, disbelief crossing his face. "No," he whispered. "This can't be right." Tasha didn't move, but her silence said everything. The truth had just hit him. The janitor he had so callously dismissed was not only highly educated, but she was a brilliant mind who had been hiding in plain sight, cleaning the very offices that made him rich. David Hayes swallowed hard, the arrogant CEO now looking like a man caught in a trap. He had underestimated her in every possible way, and now it was too late. Tasha wasn't just a cleaning woman. She had been working for Hayes Enterprises all along, not just sweeping floors, but strategically positioning herself as the silent force that could change everything. "How long?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Tasha finally spoke, her voice cool and composed. "Long enough to know how everything works here." David's chest tightened. He felt the weight of his arrogance crushing him, and for the first time in his life, he felt small. Tasha had been the one holding the cards all along, and she had waited until the right moment to reveal her hand. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was someone who had the knowledge, the education, and the power to change the game, if only she had decided to play it. As the room fell silent, David's mind raced. He had no words left. His authority had been shattered in an instant. He had fired the wrong person. Tasha had come in quietly, but she was leaving with the power to flip everything upside down. The truth had been revealed, and now he had no choice but to face the consequences. David sat there, frozen, the weight of the truth pressing down on him like a 1,000-pound weight. Tasha stood tall in front of him, not a hint of fear in her eyes. She was calm, collected, and for the first time in this office, she wasn't the invisible worker she'd always been. "I don't think you understand," David finally muttered, his voice trembling slightly. "You're not supposed to be here. You clean the floors, Tasha." Tasha didn't flinch, her expression unchanging. "I clean the floors, but I also built financial models for your company. I'm the reason you're sitting at the top." Her words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. David's hand gripped the edge of his desk as he tried to process what she was saying. He had always underestimated her, thinking she was nothing more than the woman who scrubbed the floors, kept the coffee fresh, and answered the occasional phone call. But now, she was telling him she was the one who had been quietly running the business from behind the scenes. His mind raced. How had he not seen it? How had he missed the signs? Tasha continued, her voice steady. "You think you control this company, but you don't. I've seen every deal, every secret, and every weakness you've built your empire on. I've had access to everything you didn't want me to see, and I've kept my mouth shut. Until now." David felt his stomach churn. He had built his wealth by exploiting people, by keeping them in their place. And now, the one person he had treated like a servant had been the one pulling the strings all along. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Tasha wasn't just a cleaner. She was the person who understood his company better than anyone else, and now she was in control. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Tasha looked at him, her eyes never wavering. "I want what's mine," she said simply. "What's yours?" David stammered, still trying to understand. "Everything," Tasha replied. You've built this empire off of the hard work of people like me. People you've never respected. But now, it's time for you to respect me. It's time for you to recognize who I am." David was speechless, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find the right words. He had no power here. In a single moment, Tasha had taken it all away. "You can try to fight it," she continued, "but you can't undo what's already been done. I've watched your every move, David. I've been your shadow for years, learning everything I needed to know." David's mind swirled with thoughts of how he had always treated Tasha like an afterthought, never once considering what she was capable of. He had taken her for granted, and now it was too late. The power had shifted, and it was in her hands now. "So, what's next?" he finally asked, the resignation in his voice unmistakable. "Next?" Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Next, I'm taking over, and you're going to watch me do it." David could hardly believe what he was hearing. He had built this company from the ground up, but now, everything was slipping through his fingers. He had thought Tasha was nothing more than an employee, someone to be overlooked and forgotten. But now, he saw the truth. She was the one who had always been in control, and he was nothing more than a pawn in her game. The realization was devastating, and for the first time in his life, David Hayes truly felt powerless. David's mind raced as the words echoed in his head. "I'm taking over." Tasha's declaration rang louder than any meeting he had ever been in, louder than any boardroom debate. He had always seen himself as the puppet master, the one controlling everything around him, but now the strings were in her hands. It was almost surreal. The woman who had been invisible for years was now the one holding the power. His power. "You've got nothing to say?" Tasha's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and cold. David blinked, trying to collect himself, but the reality of the situation was too much to grasp. He had built this empire, every brick, every deal, every contract, but now it felt like it was all slipping away. "What do you want, Tasha?" he finally managed to ask, his voice strained. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes locking with his. "What do I want? I want you to realize that everything you've been doing, everything you've been profiting from, was built on the backs of people like me. People you've underestimated and ignored." David tried to process her words, but it felt like his brain was on overload. He had always thought Tasha was nothing more than the woman who cleaned the office, who made the coffee, who kept everything running in the background. She was a fixture, a part of the office, but not someone who had the power to make a difference. Now, everything was different. "You think you can just take over?" David said, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no anger in his tone, no defiance. There was only a resignation, a quiet realization that his grip on everything was slipping. Tasha leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a level that made his heart race. "I don't think, David. I know." There was no room for debate, no hesitation in her words. This wasn't a negotiation. This was her taking control. "You've been too busy looking down on me," she continued, "thinking I was just a cleaner. But I've been watching you. I've been watching everything. Every meeting, every deal, every conversation you've had. And now, I have all the information I need to do what needs to be done." David's hands shook slightly, but he kept his composure. "You think you can just waltz in and take over the business I built?" he asked, trying to hold on to some semblance of control. Tasha's lips curled into a slight smile. "Waltz in? I've been here all along, David. I've been the one making sure your secrets stayed hidden. I've been the one keeping everything in check. You've just been too blind to see it." The silence between them grew heavy. David sat back in his chair, his mind racing as Tasha's words sunk in. She wasn't just some lowly employee. She was a force to be reckoned with, and he had underestimated her at every turn. For the first time in his life, David realized he wasn't in control anymore. The power had shifted. He wasn't the one making the moves, Tasha was. He had no idea what she would do next, but one thing was clear. He had no choice but to follow her lead. "So what happens now?" David asked, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Tasha's smile widened just a little. "Now, David, you start listening to me. And if you're lucky, you might just get to keep your job." Her words hung in the air, a promise and a threat all at once. David didn't respond. He didn't have to. The power was hers now, and he was left to watch as she took everything he had built and turned it into something new. David sat motionless, the weight of the realization settling over him like a fog. Tasha was right. He had built this empire, but it had always been fragile. She had been the one holding it together, the quiet observer, the one who knew all the hidden corners and secrets. Now, she was the one pulling the strings. The truth was undeniable. He had underestimated her every single day. What happens now? David repeated the question, his voice a little more defeated than before. Tasha's expression softened slightly, but there was still a glint of something calculating in her eyes. Now, she said slowly, you start to understand how fragile your empire really is. You start realizing that it was never really yours. David felt a lump form in his throat, the sting of shame catching him off guard. He had always thought he was in control, that everything he had achieved was due to his own efforts, his own genius. But now, as Tasha stood before him, calmly reclaiming the power that had always belonged to her, he could see how foolish he had been. I don't understand, he muttered, his voice barely audible. Tasha looked at him, her eyes steady. You think you control this company, David. You think you built it from the ground up. But everything you've done, every deal, every contract, every success you've had, was built on the backs of people you never saw. People like me. David's heart raced, his mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what she was saying. He had always believed that his success was due to his own brilliance, his own hard work. He had never stopped to consider the people behind the scenes, the ones who made sure everything ran smoothly. Tasha continued, I've been here longer than you think, David. I've been watching, learning, waiting. You were too busy playing your little game, too busy thinking you could manipulate everything and everyone around you. But now it's my turn to play. She paused, letting her words sink in. I'm not here to destroy you. I'm here to fix what you've broken. This company can still be great, but not under your control. It's time for a change. David sat there, stunned. He had always considered himself the king of this company, the one with the power, the one who called the shots. But now, as Tasha spoke, he could see the truth. The company was never his. It had always belonged to the people who worked behind the scenes, the ones who never got the recognition they deserved. And now, Tasha was taking her place at the helm, ready to do what he could never do. Make this company thrive for everyone, not just for himself. You think you can just take over? David asked, his voice hoarse, his pride wounded. Tasha looked at him, a small smile playing on her lips. I don't think, David. I know. And whether you like it or not, you're going to watch as I turn everything around. David's chest tightened. He had no choice now but to watch as Tasha took control. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but as he looked into her eyes, he realized there was no going back. The power had shifted, and now, Tasha would be the one to shape the future of Hayes Enterprises. David spent the next few days in a haze. The reality of what Tasha had said and what had happened weighed on him heavily. He had watched from the sidelines as she took over meetings, made decisions, and implemented changes he never would have imagined. It wasn't just a power shift, it was a complete transformation. The company that had once been his was now hers. And somehow it felt right. The way she handled herself, the calm authority in her voice, the intelligence she wielded. She wasn't just taking over. She was improving everything. David couldn't deny it. As he walked through the office, watching Tasha interact with the employees, it became clear that they respected her in a way they had never respected him. They listened when she spoke. They trusted her judgment, and they followed her lead without question. It was a humbling experience. You're quiet today. A voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Tasha standing beside him, her expression neutral but not unkind. I've been thinking, he admitted, about everything. Tasha studied him for a moment, her gaze thoughtful. You've had a lot to think about, I'm sure, she said. It's not easy to accept that everything you thought you knew was wrong. David nodded, his shoulders slumping slightly. I didn't realize what I had been missing. I thought I built this company, but I can see now that it was never really mine. It was always about the people who made it work. Tasha's lips curled into a small, understanding smile. Exactly. And those people, the ones you overlooked, they're the ones who made you successful. But now, they're the ones who will take us to the next level. Together. Her words hit him harder than he expected. She wasn't just talking about the employees, she was talking about him too. The thought of working together, of finally being on the same team, was something David hadn't even considered. For years, he had been focused on maintaining his power, on keeping control, but now he saw that the true strength of the company lay in unity, in collaboration. So what happens now? David asked, his voice low. Tasha smiled again, this time with more warmth. Now we build something that lasts. We do it together, with everyone's input, everyone's expertise. We take this company to places you never thought possible. David couldn't help but feel a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in years. He had always been the one in control, but now he understood that true leadership wasn't about power or control. It was about listening, learning, and growing with the people around you. He wasn't alone anymore. They weren't enemies. They were partners. And for the first time in a long time, David believed in the future again. It was Tasha's vision now, and he was ready to follow her lead. David had never felt this way before. For years, he had been at the top, the one everyone turned to for answers, for direction. But now, as he walked through the halls of Hayes Enterprises, everything had changed. The building that had once been a symbol of his success now felt different, less like his kingdom and more like a shared space. The employees, once intimidated by his presence, now looked to Tasha for guidance. And somehow, he didn't feel resentful. He didn't feel the need to fight for the throne. Tasha had done more than take control. She had given him a new perspective on what leadership really meant. He had always thought power was about having the final say, making the decisions, and keeping everyone in line. But now, he understood it was about trust, respect, and knowing when to step back. As he entered his office, he saw Tasha sitting at his desk, reviewing documents. It wasn't a surprise. He had grown accustomed to her making decisions for the company, even when it involved matters he thought were solely his responsibility. "You're getting comfortable in my chair," he joked, leaning against the doorframe. Tasha looked up and smiled, but it wasn't the playful smile he had once expected. It was one of quiet confidence. "I've been comfortable for a while," she replied. "I just needed the right moment to show it." Her words lingered in the air, and for a second, David felt the full weight of everything that had transpired. He had spent so much time fighting for control, for respect, that he never realized how much he had missed by overlooking the potential in the people around him. Tasha had always been there, always quietly doing her part, but it had taken her stepping into the spotlight for him to truly see her. And now, he understood what he had been blind to for so long. "I think I've learned something from you," he said, walking into the room. "I thought I knew what leadership was, but I was wrong. It's not about being in charge. It's about knowing when to step aside and trust others to lead." Tasha looked up from the papers, her gaze steady. "You don't have to step aside, David. You just need to work with me. We're in this together now. The company, the people, it's all of ours to shape." David nodded slowly, a weight lifting from his chest. He realized that for the first time in his career, he didn't feel alone. He had spent so many years isolated in his own power, thinking it was a sign of strength. But now, he saw the strength in collaboration, in sharing the load with someone who understood the bigger picture. "I'm ready," he said, his voice more certain than it had been in years. "Let's do this." Tasha smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't just a gesture of politeness. It was a sign of partnership. "We already are," she said, returning to the papers in front of her. David took a deep breath and stepped forward, joining her behind the desk. Together, they would take Hayes Enterprises into a new era, one where power was not a commodity to be hoarded, but a force to be shared. Weeks passed, and David found himself settling into a rhythm he had never expected. The power dynamics in the office had shifted, and with it, a sense of balance he had never experienced before. Tasha's leadership was calm, steady, and confident. She made decisions with precision, always listening to others and always pushing for the best outcome, not just for the company, but for everyone who worked there. David had expected to feel resentment, even jealousy, but instead, he felt something unexpected: pride. Pride in what they were building together. As he sat in on meetings, watching Tasha effortlessly lead discussions, he realized how much he had overlooked in the past. He had never seen the full picture, the way everyone in the company worked together, the way ideas flowed when they were given the space to do so. For the first time, David felt like part of a team. It wasn't just his company anymore. It was theirs. One afternoon, Tasha invited him into her office. She was reviewing a set of proposals, her face focused but relaxed. "I think we're ready to make the next move," she said, looking up at David as he entered. "We've made some significant progress, but there's more we can do. I want us to expand." David took a seat across from her, watching as she explained her vision. She didn't just see a company. She saw a network of potential, a force that could change the industry. As she spoke, her words were not just strategic, they were inspiring. It was clear now that her vision was larger than just taking over. She wanted to build something that could last, something that would stand the test of time. "You know, I've never seen this side of you," David said, his voice filled with admiration. Tasha smiled softly, a hint of pride in her eyes. "You weren't supposed to. This was always about timing. The company needed a shift, and I was the one to bring it. But I couldn't do it alone. We're a team now, David. We always have been." David leaned back in his chair, taking in her words. It felt like a turning point, not just for the company, but for him. He had spent so much time fighting for control that he never realized what he was missing. Now, as he looked at Tasha, he knew that true leadership was not about holding power. It was about sharing it, about building something greater than yourself. "What's next?" David asked, his voice filled with anticipation. "Next," Tasha said, her eyes sparkling with determination, "we take this to the next level. We push boundaries. We show the world what we're capable of. And we do it together." David nodded, a new sense of purpose filling him. It wasn't about dominance or control anymore. It was about collaboration, growth, and making a lasting impact. And for the first time, he truly felt ready to follow Tasha's lead. They were on the verge of something big, something that could change everything. And he was excited to be a part of it. The days that followed felt different for David. The company had started to shift in ways he hadn't anticipated. Tasha's presence was everywhere now, and with each passing day, her influence grew. The employees seemed more motivated, the projects were progressing faster, and the sense of unity that had once been lacking was now apparent in every corner of the office. David had always prided himself on being the visionary, but now he realized that the true vision was something larger than one person. Tasha had opened his eyes to that. It wasn't about power, it wasn't about control. It was about the collective strength of the people behind the scenes. One afternoon, Tasha invited him to a meeting with the board of directors. The same faces that had once been skeptical of her, the same people who had underestimated her, were now paying attention. David could feel the shift, could see the way they leaned in when she spoke, the way they respected her ideas. She wasn't just a part of the team now, she was leading it. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us," Tasha said, her tone confident as she addressed the board. "But we're going to do it together. This company is about collaboration, about bringing the best ideas to the table and making them happen. And I'm not doing this alone. We're all in this together." David watched as she spoke, the fire in her eyes, the clarity in her voice. He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. This was the leader he had always wanted to be, but had never quite figured out how. The meeting ended with a round of applause, something David had never seen before in all his years as CEO. The board wasn't just applauding her strategy, they were applauding her leadership. When they left the room, Tasha turned to David, a smile on her face. "What do you think?" she asked. David took a deep breath, his chest full. "I think you're exactly what this company needed," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "You're doing it, Tasha. You're not just changing the company, you're changing the game." Tasha's smile softened, but there was no trace of arrogance in it. "It's not about changing the game. It's about playing it better. And that's something we can do together." The realization hit David again, and this time, it felt like it was settling deep within him. Tasha wasn't just his equal, she was his partner. She had taught him what real leadership looked like. It wasn't about keeping everything to yourself. It wasn't about holding the reins so tight you couldn't see the bigger picture. It was about trust. Trust in others. Trust in the team. And that was something David hadn't truly understood until now. "I'm ready," David said quietly, meeting her gaze. "Let's keep going." Tasha nodded, her expression thoughtful. "We've only just begun. There's still a long road ahead of us. But together, I know we can do it." And for the first time in a long time, David felt completely at peace. He wasn't just a part of the company anymore. He was a part of something bigger, something that was shaping the future. With Tasha by his side, he knew there was no limit to what they could accomplish together. Months passed, and the transformation at Hayes Enterprises became undeniable. The company, once run with a top-down approach, now thrived under a new kind of leadership. Tasha had reshaped the company culture, and David had learned to embrace the changes with humility and gratitude. He had never imagined the power of collaboration, but now it felt like second nature. Tasha's leadership style had opened his eyes to the importance of empowering others, of recognizing the strength in people and ideas that were once overlooked. David no longer felt the need to dominate every decision. Instead, he worked with Tasha and the team, listening to their ideas, trusting their expertise. It was a new world for him, but it felt right. One morning, Tasha called David into her office. She was reviewing a proposal for a new partnership with a global company, her focus sharp as always. "David, I think we're ready for the next step," she said, looking up at him. "This partnership could take us to the next level, but it's going to require everything we've learned and everything we've built together." David nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I trust you, Tasha," he said, his voice steady. "Whatever you think is best, I'm on board." Tasha smiled, a rare moment of warmth breaking through her usually calm demeanor. "We're in this together," she said simply, before turning back to the proposal. David stood there for a moment, taking in the words. They weren't just words of reassurance. They were a promise, a reminder of everything they had worked for, everything they had become. In that moment, David realized that he wasn't just following Tasha's lead anymore. He was walking alongside her, a true partner in every sense of the word. The partnership with the global company was a success, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter for Hayes Enterprises. The company expanded, reaching new markets, attracting talented people who shared Tasha's vision for collaboration and innovation. David watched as Tasha led with the same grace and confidence she had always shown. He saw how the team responded to her leadership, how they respected her not just for her intelligence, but for her integrity. He realized that Tasha had not only transformed the company, but had